Hi, I'm Ethan Wong, and today I'm talking with Dean Young.
That's me. You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Dean Young. I am 66 years old. I just retired from over 35 years of teaching. I've been writing poems pretty much as long as I've been writing. Like most people, when I first started to learn to write, I wrote poems. But unlike most people, I just didn't stop. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. We can get straight into the questions then. So the first question is something I ask a lot of people, which is basically, when you think you first fell in love with poetry, and why did you start writing it instead of just reading it?
Uh, as I said, reading it and writing it were kind of simultaneous with me, because writing and reading when I was young, they were taught together. And the thing that struck me so much about poetry was the sort of extraordinary power words have to make a world. And an extremely pivotal book to me was One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, which convinced me the sound aspects of language, that rhyme, that silly song, is able to bring reality into being. It's able to create a world. So it was always, for me, not so much what I had to say, but what language could make and look back at me with. So it's that process. You know, people have like, we all have a limited amount of tools. You know, some people, like, they have a hammer, right? That's all they have. So everything's a nail. For me, I think what I have is kind of cattle prod. And I just try to add whatever kind of electricity I can to have the language wake up and manifest some kind of effect that rivals actual physical experience.
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I've never really thought about it exactly like that, especially because the way that I've always thought about writing poems has been kind of about like I've always like done something similar where it's creating worlds and stuff. But I think that point at which you specifically connect it to like almost imitating a physical reality is the part that I never really made that connection.
Yeah, also when you're writing a poem, you're in collaboration with poetry, which means you're in collaboration with every poem that has ever been written, and maybe language itself. So one of the things is, you're automatically not the smartest person in the room, but you have a genius on your side. So to some extent, you need to, at least for me, it's a matter of cultivating my own awareness to, I don't, in many ways, I don't actually write my poems. I just create the situation for a poem to occur. Unlike the host, rather than the single most active participant in the party. I'm the host, and language is the party. Poetry is the party.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is definitely that's a way that I've looked at it before too. It's just you have to kind of funnel through whatever is coming at you and then put it into words, however you figure out to do so as a kind of medium. But also going off of that, you mentioned something about rhyming before. So in your poetry, do you generally try to rhyme? Do you use free verse, or what kind of like what are the styles that you use in your poetry generally?
Music is important to me, so I'm always trying to listen to the poem and accentuate, conspiracies of verb sounds, of vowel sounds rather, repetition. Rhyme is just one particular kind of sonic effect, right? There are a lot of others, but I don't shy away from rhyme when it happens, and when it happens, I try to, explore it, but I never intend it.
Hmm.
because as soon as you intend it, it shows up, and the rhymes then do what Keats called pounce. You know, you get to an end of a line and you know it's going to rhyme. So it becomes kind of, you know, kind of irritating and just not very explorative.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've seen a lot with that, even when writing my own poetry. It's like whenever I make it rhyme, it makes the poem feel, I think oftentimes it can interrupt the flow of my writing, just having to sit there and be like, well, now I need a word here that rhymes with the one I just previously wrote in the
Yeah, you're
previous line.
trapped.
Yeah.
You know, so to some extent, you feel trapped in the poem, and the poem feels trapped too. And when that happens, it just stops. You know, it just stops.
So in like shifting up to like a different perspective on your poetry, what kind of themes do you explore? Like what is the content of your poetry?
Well, I would say the content of my poetry is a symptom of its style. And how I would describe my style, it's a little bit like trying to describe how you look with your face pressed against a mirror. You know, you really can't, descriptions of your own work are just kind of, they're going to be off because you can't help getting all involved with how you feel about yourself at that moment. But I would say my poems are kind of interested in the vastness of experience, of sensation, how we can get, you know, we can stand in the rain and have that feeling, but we can also have that feeling by reading a line that says, I'm standing in the rain. So the effects are not only descriptive of the world, but language itself has primary effects. So I guess, you know, that would be my primary content, that it seeks to, you know, encounter these energy fields of meaning and sensation.
Yeah.
You know, with that, of course, is the brevity of being, you know, mortality, you know, which all art has to face, because it's not art if it doesn't have a form. And a form is a manifestation of mortality, because the form says there can only be so much and it can only go on so long.
Yeah. And adding on to that, I wanted to ask, so how has your career as an educator, you think, either influenced your poetry, or I guess vice versa, how has your like specific way of writing poetry, you think, educated your or influenced your education?
Yeah, it's interesting because it goes both ways, right? I'd say being a college professor for so long has made me explanatory, both perhaps in a good way and in a bad way. And I've always felt that against myself and like in others, by telling young poets, you don't have to explain yourself. You weren't put on this planet to explain yourself, and nor is your writing obligated to explain you to the vastness of the world. Also, I think being, you know, being a professor, and this is how you can tell I am of an old generation, I felt obligated to some extent to really do my best with the historical tradition of Western poetry. So I read a lot. I taught a lot of texts from the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, which, you know, they're not particularly my favorites at all the times, but I think a historical interaction with poetry is absolutely vital. And if that's not happening in a classroom, I don't know what is. There's something else happening now. It all has to do with regurgitating institutionalized pieties and simultaneously describing the contents of your own pants. I'm from a different world. I'm from a different world where I feel like Keats has as much to say to us as the news crawl does. So I think that particular sort of, and as you can see, it's a point of conflict. as assertion always is, has both, is what I conceive my job as, and it's the job that there is no longer a place for in English departments. Let's just say that flat out. And in most creative writing programs too. That's not what's happening anymore. So I'm a fossil. I'm gone. So we're talking about the past.
I mean, like, in terms of what you teach, what do you think has been, like, maybe a few poets or a movement or something that you think has been the most, I don't know how to say this is kind of an odd question, but the most fundamental, like, pivoting point for you when you teach? What is something, like, maybe every course you would, like, say this is the most important point or something like that?
Well, I think all my thinking goes through the avant-garde. So sort of open experimentation, the dissatisfaction with a convention in all its manifestations, formal stylistic experimentation, the cultivation of surprise, and what Whitman called the poetry that challenges and eludes. It provokes and it dodges. So that sort of engagement. I don't think my poems will necessarily make anybody feel better about themselves or tell them, for God's sakes, who to vote for. Except as a form of comedy. Yeah. See? And you're laughing at the notion, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted
So I
to.
always tell people to read Guillaume Apollinaire. If you
Okay.
haven't read Apollinaire, do. You'll love them. Read it. Read Donald Ravel's translations. They're not completely accurate, but they really, really get at Apollinaire's artistic joy and what the hell experimentation. But yeah, you, Ethan, should immediately read a book called The Dismembered Man.
Okay.
It's a collection of poems by Apollinaire translated by Donald Ravel. It's a great book.
I'll make sure to do that.
And there's so many differences for how a poem can be made in that book. It'll definitely light some fuses for you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask, like, one final question before we get into the poetry reading, which is, what do you think is an important piece of advice for people who are just getting into poetry, maybe in the middle school or high school level, that you think you'd want to give them after your experience as an educator?
I would say always, always, always trust and stay in contact with those first impulses that made you write a poem. You weren't writing a poem to get it published in Poetry Magazine. You weren't writing a poem so you would get into a prestigious poetry program. You were writing a poem purely so that you could have a living experience with poetic language. So if you keep that alive, you'll be fine. Otherwise, it can be extremely, extremely discouraging. So, that is your claim to poetry, and it's irrevocable. Nobody can take it away from you. So just keep that alive.
Yeah. All right. If you're ready, we'll get into the poem.
Yeah, I don't know how many you want me to read, but I just got poems I've been working on in the last couple of weeks. This one I sort of am still working on, I think. It's called Stuntman. To have dreamed my love snowflakes, to have kicked a bookcase in the night, to wake with spider legs on the pillowcase, and for months know where the pain comes from. To have stepped on a tiny glass hummingbird, to stare in the corner of the mind and pull the hanged man, to pinken some sputum. Oh, I don't know how to live without you. To write something that's stupid. To put things in perspective, falling down the steps, regardless the condition of the birthday cake. Yes to the wax chorus melting off its heads. Yes to the tattooed thorns around my wrist. And going back to have the blood drips touched up. Yes to a cardiologist who can take a joke. It's a good day to wear my only good white shirt like a dare, like an expiration date. To watch a red dress blow out a window. A locust evicting its former self. A tube leaking something blue. Oh, I don't know how to live without you. I allowed myself to be completely corny in that poem. One of the worst lines I've ever written in my life. Oh, I don't know how to live without you. Really bad, right? So I put it in twice. It's the only thing I do. It's like playing jazz, you know, you make a mistake. You only do it once, it's a mistake. Do it twice, it starts to become something. All right, this is it. I work a lot in cafes, and there's some of them I love. There's one in Austin, which I don't want to tell you the name of because then more people will go there and I'll ruin it. Yeah, so this is a poem about cafes and what it's like being in them, but it's not specifically one. It's an amalgam of, you know, a cafe in Iowa City and a cafe in Berkeley and one in Amherst. It's called I Like This Cafe. It almost feels like somewhere else. Like when someone touches your belly button and you feel it in your ear. Third eye winking. It always seems to be vibrating. Coltrane holding one note. Lots of stuff falling off tables. Keys bound to foam dragons. Jars of fire. Rough drafts of avalanches. Blueprints of ruined Byzantiums. Some guy circling words in magazines, figuring out how Mars will attack, the precise submarine routes. Maybe it all comes down to one untranslatable fragment by Parmenides after all. There's a freestanding window in the center of the room anyone who wants to can jump from. There's an entirely fetching mermaid stenciled above a urinal. Someone's getting werewolf lessons over a tablet. A beautiful woman vaporizes whoever tries to approach her curly little dog. Jars and jars of fire. Someone turning over the tower. Someone calculating how to blow up the moon to form a UV shield of lunar dust. And for a while, a nurse in a cornfield with the head of a rhino watching over my favorite table between rotating displays of ambitious scribbles, gravity-defying blotches, and big-eyed cactus. Always convivial and confused, the staff's a bit hysterical, not in a rip your ovaries out way, but a fuck this world's absurd way. The way anybody'd feel dropping a roll of quarters into the dishwater, or confusing almond milk and opium, or taking orders in Sanskrit, or trying to work with Mary. I too have been at the end of the world to find this place. I too have been mired with the ciphers of penny and inch, but much I prefer a finger-painted mess, ash thrown in the air. I too have seen what years of tears do to a jade face. A woman dives into the volcano of her novel, some kids using nothing but red crayons, while a great spirit froths over us like a floofed out bedsheet. Dancers igniting the evening, birds singing first light into being, a slight discount for cash.
Thank you. Those were great.
You're welcome.
I think I definitely see some of what you were talking about in the way that you use your words in those poems. And I can definitely understand what you were going for.
Yeah, it's like I'm in this thing, I'm really in a listing thing.
Mm-hmm.
So poems are like one of the sort of forms of poetry is the list. Like you go into somebody's house, there's a list on the refrigerator. You can always read it as a poem. There are interesting things that come about through listing. And it's sort of my fail-safe thing. Even when I can't even form a sentence, I'll just make lists, and then some sort of direction or glue appears, and then maybe it seems like a poem to me.
Yeah, I think that list format is definitely, every time I read a poem in the list format, I always think that it always has a certain kind of feel about it. I can't really describe it, but it seems almost effortless in a way to have the poem be written out as a list.
Yeah, and as readers, we recognize a list, so we automatically feel a little bit secure, and also we allow for really disparate stuff. You know, you go to a hardware store, there's a watermelon on the list for a hardware store. Okay, that doesn't throw us that much, right? And the way hardware stores now are, you probably get a watermelon at one.
All right. Do you have any closing comments before?
No, you guys are the future of poetry, and I want you to approach it with joy and abandon. I don't want you to be institutionalized. I don't want the art to become a spokesman for social issues. It's an art. It's always ahead of us. It's, you know, I love ephemera as much as anybody. I'm surrounded by, you know, just ephemera. But poetry has a different kind of business that is available to it, that it's outside the ephemera, that it can participate in the eternal song of poetry that's not confined to the news crawl. So be free, be experimental, and have fun with the art. It is so far from exhausted. It's, you know, it is, lyric poetry is the most capacious form there is. It can, anything language can do, anything language can do, can be in poetry. Any word, any phrase, any attitude.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.